Lecture. By 1900. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we step into the United States at the dawn of the 20th century. Imagine the year is 1900. Across the nation, Americans are filled with pride, optimism, and a nearly unshakable faith in the future. The feeling was that theirs was a nation uniquely blessed, destined for greatness. Faith and optimism. Most Americans at the time assumed they lived in a Christian Protestant nation. Religion was part of everyday life. Bible reading in schools was common, chapel services were still required at many universities, and even a U.S. Supreme Court justice could proclaim, "This is a Christian nation." The optimism of the people was bound up with faith, patriotism, and economic prosperity. Inventions, booming cities, and new opportunities seemed to confirm that progress was unstoppable. Industrialization. The most significant transformation was industrialization. By the late 1800s, the value of manufactured goods had surpassed that of farm products. America had become the world's leading industrial power. Steel, oil, and electricity were reshaping life. Andrew Carnegie's steel empire soared in value. Rockefeller's Standard Oil dominated refining, and Thomas Edison's light bulb transformed homes and industries. In 1900, 8,000 automobiles shared the roads, though there was barely a mile of smooth pavement in the entire country. Railroads, with over 200,000 miles of track, tied the nation together. They carried raw materials, finished goods, and people, fueling mass production and national markets. Alongside this growth came the rise of the modern corporation, vast organizations managed by boards and executives, raising huge sums of capital from investors, corporate mergers, and the money trust. By 1900, business leaders sought to control competition. Pools, trusts, and eventually holding companies allowed industries to consolidate power. United States Steel, formed in 1901, was capitalized at an astonishing $1.4 billion. Investment bankers like J.P. Morgan orchestrated these mergers, earning immense influence over the economy. As he bluntly admitted, "I like a little competition, but I like combination better." Urbanization and immigration. Industrialization drew millions to the cities. By 1900, nearly 40% of Americans lived in towns or cities, and 38 cities boasted populations over 100,000. Immigration fueled much of this growth. Between 1860 and 1900, 14 million newcomers arrived, largely from Southern and Eastern Europe. They settled in ethnic neighborhoods, often working low-wage jobs in factories, construction, or service industries. Urban technology dazzled many, skyscrapers, electric streetcars, and telephones, but poverty and overcrowding plagued tenements, where thousands were crammed into dark, unsanitary buildings. Prosperity and education. Material wealth was spreading, real wages rose, per capita income was the highest in the world, and farmers enjoyed new technologies and better markets. Education expanded as well. Public school enrollment more than doubled in 30 years, illiteracy dropped, and nearly 1,000 colleges and universities served 240,000 students. Professional fields like medicine and law raised their standards, signaling America's growing intellectual and professional maturity, a world power. On the global stage, the U.S. emerged as a new world power. The Spanish-American War of 1898 resulted in control over Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Hawaii was annexed, and the open door policy asserted American interests in China. A modern navy, inspired by Alfred Thayer Mahan's call for sea power, positioned the nation to project influence abroad. In Antmai, Psie, Patkulchas, the other side of the coin. Yet beneath this confidence lay deep social and economic problems. The gap between rich and poor widened. By 1900, 1% of the population owned more wealth than the other 99% combined. Workers endured long hours, dangerous conditions, and low pay. Child labor was rampant. Labor unions like the American Federation of Labor grew, but they still represented only a small fraction of workers. Cities were crowded, unsanitary, and politically corrupt, dominated by machines like New York's Tammany Hall. Farmers, women, and minorities farmers, though temporarily prosperous, remembered years of depression and remained wary of railroads, banks, and fluctuating markets. Women faced social expectations of piety and domesticity, though many entered teaching, nursing, and reform movements. Feminists pushed for suffrage, but by 1900, only 4 Western states had granted women the vote. For African Americans, this period marked what historians call the nadir of race relations. Sharecropping, Jim Crow, segregation, disfranchisement, and racial violence, especially lynching, were daily realities. Booker T. Washington's message of vocational training and patience won widespread acceptance, though figures like W.E.B. Du Bois urged a more militant pursuit of equality. Native Americans, after decades of warfare, were confined to reservations, impoverished, and largely dependent on government aid. Politics and the election of 1900. Politically, corruption, patronage, and election fraud were common. Congress dominated national politics, while presidents were generally weak administrators. William McKinley, running on prosperity and a strong dollar, easily defeated Democrat William Jennings Bryan in 1900 with Theodore Roosevelt as his running mate. The Republican Party entered a long period of dominance. Seeds of reform. Still, reform was in the air. By the late 1890s, critics were exposing urban slums, labor abuses, and corruption. The language of progress grew louder, setting the stage for the progressive era. Americans entered the 20th century convinced of their nation's greatness, but also increasingly aware that industrialization, urbanization, and inequality demanded reform. Closing. In short, by 1900, America stood at a crossroads, confident, prosperous, and expanding globally, yet facing problems of inequality, injustice, and corruption. These tensions would give rise to the reform movements of the progressive era.